Okay, welcome back. So we're going to continue working on this image. We are looking at the unedited raw file. I know that's a raw file because down here it has the image number as well as a .cr2. As a reminder, that is a raw file that is comes from the Canon camera. Nikon cameras have a .nef, and then other brands have their various extensions. So this image is it's a nice looking image, it's a good looking person, and it can be adjusted however you like. It depends on the mood of the picture, what you're trying to achieve. Having a raw file allows you to do a lot more adjustments and still retain the details, proper exposure. You can adjust a lot more with this than you could with a JPEG. There's a lot more levels. This is a 16-bit image as opposed to an 8-bit image, and that gives you thousands and thousands of levels from dark to light that you can adjust, whereas the 8-bit JPEGs have 256 levels of adjustment. So this is the way to go if you're trying to be able to have the option to adjust your photo as much as possible. If you're just doing shots of your friend playing soccer or things like that, there's no reason to shoot in RAW unless you're trying to be if you're going to go back and artistically and creatively adjust the photos. But if you're just documenting something and you're not going to need to adjust it, then shoot in JPEG. The image to the right is a photo that I've retouched. So you can see the difference, how it goes from the raw file. This is now in JPEG format after it's been edited. So you do all of your main editing in the raw format, and then you export it as a JPEG. So this is a final version. You can see the skin is a little bit softer. It's been softened a little bit. Some of the color is different, and we'll do some retouching as well on the raw file and export it. Okay? So if you look at that version compared to this version, there are some differences. Okay, so let's get started with what you can do with this program. Once we're in the development module, you can go to the far right, and there are many, many different steps, many different things that you have options for. First thing you start with is you can start with your white balance if you'd like. If I click on as shot, there are different options. Different times of the day, the daylight or the sunlight has different color tones to it. It's measured in Kelvin. When it's directly overhead, it's a pretty blue color. It's considered a pure white. Cloudy days have a lot of blue in them, so you want to add some amber color. So if I click on daylight, it has a little bit of a blue tone to it. Maybe hard to see. When you add a slight amount of blue to skin that has a little bit of red, it starts to shift towards purple. It's not like her face suddenly turned into an Oompa Loompa, but it has a slight blue cast. To go from daylight to cloudy, overcast days, cloudy days have a lot of blue in the sky. So what the cameras do to counteract that and try to have a neutral white is the opposite on the color wheel, and you have the kind of this yellow amber color. In my opinion, I think people look better with a little bit of a warmer tone, a little bit healthier. So I sometimes will just set my white balance on my camera to cloudy when I'm photographing people. And it all depends on what you prefer and what you're trying to achieve with your picture. So if you know what you're trying to do, trying to make them look like a vampire or something, you probably wouldn't want them to have warm, healthy toned skin. Shade has even more blue in it when you're standing out in the shade. So what the camera does is it adds even more amber color. Tungsten light is extremely amber color. You can see the Kelvin number right here. It's 2850. So it counteracts that by throwing in a lot of blue, which is actually the opposite. When you're the old style tungsten light bulbs, which they actually don't make anymore, or most people are switching to fluorescent. Tungsten lights had a very, very strong amber color to them, so to counteract, they use the opposite on the color wheel, which is the blue. This image looks very different, has a very different mood than if you were to look at it in shade. So Again, it depends on what you want to do. These are presets. If you want to adjust it however you like, you can slide it this way. I personally would recommend you stay away from like extremes. I don't know why you'd be doing that, but it's an option. The other thing is, we'll talk about this later, but you can also set the white balance if you have a neutral toned color in your image. Sometimes we can shoot with a gray card. That's something where a person will hold up a card where we know the actual gray color, and you can click on that card for the first image, and you can apply that color adjustment to all the rest of your images. Obviously the rest of the pictures the person would not be holding the gray card, but just to let you know. So I adjusted this gray. I'm not a big fan of how this color went, so I'm going to go back to the cloudy tone. Okay. The next step, I'm going to skip over this tint that I don't really use much. I'm not a big fan of it, but you can slide and adjust from green to magenta. So when I do that, here under exposure, this is just like exposure in your camera. You can adjust this a lot more if you have a raw file. So I could bring up any lost detail if I wanted to. If it was underexposed, I can bring back some of that detail by sliding it to the right. That's a little bit overly bright. I'm going to go let's just do half a stop. Alright, so I did plus half a stop, 0.50, brighten it up just a little bit. When you adjust these things, your histogram up top here on the right, that adjusts, and this picture is fairly well exposed. It's filling the majority of from the far left where it's pure black to the far right where it's pure white. Sometimes you'll have pictures that's underexposed. Let's see if I can find one. Here's one that's underexposed, and you can see on the histogram there's no information from this little point of color to the far right. It's very, very underexposed. So I could slide this over and bring in some detail. Still looks pretty bad, but with the JPEG, that's what happens. It's just underexposed. With this as a raw file, I could bring in and have more information. So this is the JPEG version. I boosted the exposure to 2.62. Here I'm at 2.38. And you can see, I went even higher than that. You can see there's more information in the raw file. I have more detail here under the eyes. So even though it's very underexposed, I can still see the detail. In the JPEG, I cranked up the exposure. It's still very dark and there's no detail. And in fact, you probably won't really be able to see any detail without it going pure white like it is right now. So for right now, the reason you're seeing this red on their face, on her face, is because I had clicked on this triangle at the top right. And that shows and warns of clipping, which means that it's completely overexposed. It's pure white, there's no detail there. So you can just hover over this little triangle, it'll show you what areas are going to be clipped, or if you want it permanent, you can have it there. So you can adjust your clipping or your exposure so that that goes away. Again, just reinforcement regarding the use of RAW. Here's a good example. JPEG file, same image. Over here is the RAW file. I can crank this up, keep exposure. The opposite is true with the histogram on the far left on the top. You can show what areas there's clipping with the dark areas or the blacks. So I can go change the exposure, and blue instead of red will start showing up in the areas that are too dark. Obviously that photo's a little dark, overly dark, but it just gives you warnings. Something that won't show up on a printer or a photograph. Alright, so let's go back to the original photo. I like this gray background, but I think I want to make it a little bit darker. So I'm going to come down here where there's black, so I'm going to adjust the black slider. Turn off the warning. Alright, so I can see what I've adjusted. I can go back and look by coming down here and cycle between my edits. Up top here, this top half is the before, the bottom is the after. Here it is side by side. So you can just kind of have a reference point of where you started and where you're at. Sometimes it's really tough to tell. Alright, so I've adjusted the blacks. You can kind of play around and see what happens if you adjust the shadows. This is more the mid-tones, not the pure black. White, anything that's really, really bright will get overly bright. Alright, with clarity, clarity takes down some of the detail in the lighter areas. So this works really well for skin. If I zoom in all the way, you can see skin has a lot of texture, and naturally skin does have texture, although you wouldn't know it if you looked at magazine covers. They present it as if people have completely smooth skin. This person has really good skin, and they even have makeup on. So if you didn't have makeup, you'd see even more texture. Later on, we can go in and adjust the clarity at a specific spot with the edit brush. Right now, I'm just going to change the clarity a little bit by sliding this down. And if I go all the way, you can see how the skin really softens up. The areas that have high contrast, that are dark, stay nice and sharp. I've obviously gone way too far. This is -100, but just to show you what it looks like, everything's really, really soft. Okay? If you go to the far right, everything gets really, really rough. Look at the detail. It looks like the person's been hanging out in the sun and smoking at the same time. So not a good look, unless you're trying to get revenge on your old girlfriend or boyfriend. So here what we have is we're going to go to minus, I'll just do -25. And then I think it's going to give it enough softness for it to work. Okay. All right. So I have clarity, and vibrance will adjust the color and the amount of color here. This could be a nice look if that's what you're going for. I would say be very, very subtle with some of these. The vibrance, saturation, and clarity. Don't go overboard. Saturation especially, if you adjust it at all, it goes on pretty strong. So bring this, it adjusts the saturation for everything in the picture. That I think is overboard. So I'm going to leave that at 0 actually. We're not going to do a tone curve right now. That'll be a separate tutorial. There's a lot you can do with the tone curve, so I'm not going to address that yet. Hue, saturation, and luminance, you can adjust all of those. You can adjust the hue. If I select it, the hue becomes visible, and I can go in and change the hue just for one specific color. And I'm going to pick a different image to show you some of these techniques that you can use. I have a picture where they're wearing a blue dress. And what I could do is, with this little tool, it looks like a little target, if you hover over it, it gives you a up and down arrow, and I'm going to click on it. So it went from gray to white, and now when I bring my cursor over, it is included with my cursor. And what's going to happen is I'm going to click on the blue dress. When I click on it, the cursor will disappear. But if I click and drag up, it'll change the color. If I drag down, it'll change the color as well. So this dress is one color, so I can adjust this by clicking, and I can drag up, and now instead of a blue dress, she's wearing a purple dress. And I can do this in this photo because there isn't really anything else in the photo that has the same color as the dress. If she was also wearing, if she had blue eyes, or if this band up here was blue, that would also be adjusted. So just be aware of that. So now cursor disappears. I have the mouse clicked, and I'm going to drag down. It's going to go from blue to turquoise. So it's just adjusting the hue. All right, I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo that. That same tool you could use for saturation. So I can make just that dress black and white if I wanted to. So it's a nice tool to have. If you wanted to click on the skin, if the skin is pretty much the same color, I can take out all the saturation of just the skin. So anything that has added color, like the dress and the lips, keep their saturation. So that's a nice tool to have to play around with. You can do that in Photoshop as well, but this is a very quick way to do it. If you have a very strong colored background that's different than any color that's on the person, you can also adjust your background color. So I still have this tool. If I want to get rid of it, I can come back and click on it again, and then my cursor comes back to the normal cursor. All right, let's go back to the original image. Okay. Sharpening. If you want to go in and sharpen, this is universal. This will sharpen the entire image. You may want to go in with a brush and adjust the sharpening on a local area, so one specific area. Okay, so speaking of brushes, well, let me show you what sharpening will do. I don't sharpen too much. Again, you want to be fairly subtle. And I already softened this up with clarity, so this will kind of counteract that if you add in sharpening. So with somebody with texture, if you create a whole bunch of sharpening, it's going to bring out that texture even more. So not really recommended too much if you're trying to soften up somebody's skin. Okay, so let's talk about the tools up here. Cropping is a really nice tool. In Photoshop, when you crop and you save your image, everything that you cropped out is gone forever. In Lightroom, if I click on this, it gives you these little boundary boxes, and you can crop however you want. Go over here and drag, click and drag, and then I can click on this box again, and now the image is cropped. The great thing is, if I decide to change my cropping, click on it again, come back whenever, today, tomorrow, whenever, and you can always bring back the original proportions of the image. So you can click on the tool, or you can go to the bottom right where it says done. Okay, that is a very nice feature, and many of you who have used Photoshop in the past, you know that's a very nice tool. All right, so let's say you have a phobia of freckles. There is a little tool right here, spot removal, and that's a giant size brush. So I'm zoomed in. If I want to adjust my brush, I can use the left and the right bracket keys on my keyboard, and if I click directly on that and then drag with my mouse, and I can put this wherever I want, it's copying where you see the circle right now. It's going to copy what's in the circle over to where the arrow is ending. So you find something that is similar to what you're trying to get rid of, and there you go. Your phobia of freckles is solved. All right, so I can go in here again. This is a little bit too big for what I need. So I'm using my left bracket. There. If I want to move around, I can use the space bar to slide this around and see if there's anything else I want to edit out. It's okay to have freckles. I'm just showing you how to use the tool. If you need to do major editing, then you would want to open this up in Photoshop, and that's a separate deal. If you want to edit in Photoshop, you go down to thumbnail, you can right click on it, and you can click on edit in and choose your editing program. In this case, it's Photoshop CS6. That'll open up in Photoshop. You can edit and save it back into Lightroom. Right now, we're not going to deal with that. All right, so that is the spot tool. If the person has red eye, you can do that. Rarely ever have red eye. The graduated filter works really well with landscapes, and I'll show you how to use that when we get to a landscape photo. Now this brush is allows you to adjust things, local adjustments with a brush. So if I come up all the way, I have a plug-in for an iris enhance. So if I wanted to adjust that, I'm going to hold the space bar down, zoom in. I have this iris enhance, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start drawing around the eye. You can see how it changes a little bit. Now when you drop in a brush, it drops in this little pin. And if I hover my cursor right where the pin is, it gives me a red indicator of where I've drawn with the brush. Now I can also click and drag. If I click, so right now I have my left mouse button clicked. If I drag to the left or drag to the right, it adjusts how much the iris is adjusted, which is a really nice feature. So you can go in and adjust it, and you can brush in your brush with the iris enhance and then adjust it later on. So I'm going to go over here, and I move that canvas by pressing the space bar down because I'm in a brush tool, and if I click, it's going to adjust the skin right here, but if I hold the space bar down, I get the hand and I can slide this over. Alright, so I'm going to zoom out. And I can see if I like that, see if it's too much or not enough. I can come back and edit this. I'm going to drag it to the left a little bit, far right, maybe something in the middle. Okay, so I'm done with that. Also under brushes, I could use, there's a teeth whitening. She doesn't have her mouth open, so I can't do that. Or I can soften skin. And this is really nice for especially under the eyes if you want to go in and soften it up. So left and right brackets to change the size of your brush. And the far outer edge of the brush is the actual full size of the brush, but the smaller circle that you're looking at is where it starts to fade. So you have kind of a fade between the brush. It's not a hard edge. Come in here. Right now I'm just concerned about brushing over all the areas that I want to adjust, not having it be the amount that I need, because I can adjust that later. So just softening a little bit. Alright, so where I have brushed, it's going to show up as red. I can hover over this and it'll show me. Now the brush stays the same size, so if I zoom in, same size. And you can hover over this and I can drag it to the left and change the softness, or I can go to the right and clarity can adjust as well. Alright, so the bottom right, I'm going to say done. Now if you find an image that has some teeth, let's see. That's a funny picture. Okay, so if we wanted to go in and edit teeth, with this drop-down list, there's a teeth whitening tool. I can click and zoom in to the teeth. Obviously, want to make this a little bit smaller. And it takes some of that saturation or yellow saturation out of the teeth. With teeth whitening, like all these other tools, you don't want to go completely overboard, otherwise it's going to be obvious. And it's fine to have it white, but not overly white. So I can see if I hover over this where I've put the brush. I'm missing a little bit right here. I can come down here just a little bit. Alright, so if I click and drag to the right, then it's like glowing like they've been drinking Clorox bleach. But here we go to the left, far left. If I drag the cursor to the far left, that's the original. If I drag it to the right, and I'm doing this with the left button pressed down. There you go. Before and after, here's a little bit yellow. So everything stays the same except the teeth are changed. So it's a nice tool to have if you want to do some retouching, especially for some of the fashion projects. All right, let's go look at our image and see if we're done yet. Okay, so I've adjusted the, did some retouching, adjusted the brightness, saturation, adjusted the eyes, and if we look at the original, the color is very different, retouching the skin, things like that. So that's a great way to use Photoshop, Photoshop Lightroom, and use all the tools that are available to you. The great thing is that whatever adjustments you make on this, you can also copy and paste to other images as long as they are shot with the same lighting. So let me show you an example of that. Let's see. This is also a raw file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the one that I've edited, that's raw, and I'm going to copy. It's going to give me an option for all the things that I want to copy. I'm not going to copy the local adjustments, which are the brush and if I had graduated filters, because I brushed on her skin. The next picture that I'm going to paste on is a different picture, a different location. So the computer doesn't know exactly where I did the brushing. So that will not be selected for this one. But everything else I'm going to keep selected. I'm going to hit copy, go to this next image, and I'm going to hit paste. And there you go. I can look at the original. There's the pasted version. So that is where this program is really nice, because all those adjustments can quickly be pasted, and if I don't like it, I can go back to the original, and nothing was done to the original file. So it's a great tool to have. I selected one picture. I could do this to a lot of photos. These are all pretty similar. If I applied something to them, I could adjust it, all of these all at once very easily. You would just adjust one picture, hold shift down, select them, and hit sync. I'm not going to do that right now. Let's see. Nope, not going to do that right now. All right, one other thing that I've left out, and then we'll be done, is presets. So let's find a new image. Actually, I'll just go to the one that I edited. Presets are on the far left. I haven't dealt with them yet. These come with Lightroom, and you can also find some that are online where people make them and you can download and install into Lightroom. This little twirl down, for Lightroom black and white filter presets, if I hover over it, it'll show my thumbnail and what it'll look like if I click on that and what it'll change to. Let's have a bigger preview here. Green filter, infrared, orange. So that's black and white. Here's some toned images. So I can hover over them and see what it'll look like. I can also click on it, and my image will automatically go to that preset, and all these sliders will change accordingly. Well, if I don't like that, I can either hit Control-Z, or I can just go back to my history, which, as you can see, if I scroll down, there's a lot of stuff that it retains. It has all the settings as well. I can go step by step. There's where I cropped. And I can go back to the original image. So presets are really nice. You can also save, once you've adjusted a photo the way you want, you can save that as a preset. That'll be a separate tutorial. Some of these new ones, this is pretty interesting looking. Okay, so that's a quick way to adjust your photos to a certain look. So once you create a look for a photo, like if I've gone through and edited this photo to make it look like this, I can save that by adding that preset based on the current settings that I have, and the next time I have photos that I want to edit, I can apply that preset. So a really, really nice feature, and it doesn't affect the original photo. And you can quickly go through and see all these different presets and what they do. This one's called Mulligan Stew, and apply it to your photo. Those are presets.